A robot may not injure a human being, or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to Issues in Focus. And those of you who are science fiction fans may have recognized those 3 laws of robotics that I just recited. They're from a book by a very famous author, Isaac Asimov, a book called I, Robot. Peggy, I wonder, when you hear the word robot, what sort of image do you have in your mind?
Well, when I first think of robots, I think of cartoon characters, also of Star Wars types. Robots, machines that look and act like humans.
Yes.
There are evil robots too, of course, but friendly ones too.
Yes, I wonder whether robots are friends or foes. I think the same as you. When I first hear the word robot, I think of something that looks rather like a human being, except that it's made of metal. And perhaps one of the reasons for this is that actually the word robot was first used in the 1920s in a play by a Czechoslovak author. And apparently the word robot itself comes from a Czechoslovak word meaning work or labor. And that's how we get the word today. And
so there's a very human element.
Well, there's a human element, but on the other hand, yes, in the play that this Czechoslovak author wrote, the robots were thinking creatures. They were able to think and use their minds, if you can call them minds, in the same way as human beings were. But the trouble is that they had no emotions, they had no sensibilities, they couldn't feel love or hate or jealousy or all the other things that we associate with human life. And maybe because they lacked this emotional level, we think of robots today as rather evil, threatening things, things that are likely to push human beings into situations where they don't want to be. On the other hand, as you said, there are friendly robots. And when we think about Japanese comic books in particular, there are all sorts of robot characters in them who seem to be friendly to people, don't there? Have you noticed that, Peggy?
In my childhood, too, a lot of comic book characters were robots that I enjoyed.
I wonder then whether we can describe robots as friends or foes to man, and that's the subject that we'd like to focus on in today's program. Well, now, we started off by looking at a picture of what many people think of as a robot, something that looks like a human being with arms and legs. And we've been talking about a science fiction novel in which robots figure. But actually, Peggy, when we talk about robots today, we're not talking necessarily about those human-shaped things, are we?
In fact, it's very far from what most robots that are actually in use really look like.
Well, there are robots in use in industry. We call them industrial robots. And I wonder whether we can talk about these in Japan and in other countries abroad. Peggy,
the number of industrial robots in Japan, of course, is much more than in other countries.
Well, so it would seem. We're looking at a chart now, and that shows that there are an immense number of robots.
In terms of the ones that have been built and are actually in operation, almost twice the number in Japan, by certain definitions, as in the United States.
Yeah.
But, of course, sometimes the definitions of robots vary.
Is that so?
That makes one difference in the chart. Another thing that we might want to think about is that in terms of the working population, a country like Sweden actually has more robots per population than does Japan.
Well, that's certainly something that doesn't emerge from that chart, but it's something worth looking about. Well, however many robots are in operation, we can certainly say that we live in an age of robotics. We live in an age where robots are important and look like becoming increasingly important. This age can really be said to have begun in the 1980s, and as a result of it, a large number of symposiums and conferences are mounted these days where people get together and talk about robots, look at robots, and discuss their applications. Well, at some of these internationally organized exhibitions and symposiums, new robots from Japan and from all the other countries that produce robots have been demonstrated. In fact, the International Symposium on Industrial Robots, which we're looking at here, was first held in 1970. That was in the United States. It's held every year in different countries. About every fourth year, the conference is held in Japan, and the conference that we're looking at here was one held in Tokyo in 1981. Well, now this is an international exhibition of industrial robots, and this is also held in Tokyo. It's one of the many exhibitions that are held around the world. This one is held in Tokyo about every 2 years. And here we can see all kinds of different robots doing all kinds of different things. And I must say, Peggy, I don't know whether to be fascinated or terrified by them. I'm glad we now have some human beings on the screen. That's the nicest thing I've seen. Well, we've been talking about science fiction, and to be perfectly honest, that's about the only level at which I ever think about robots or consider their applications in my daily life. Neither Peggy nor I can claim to be an expert on robotics. But fortunately, we do have with us in the studio today a guest who is an expert on robots, and that's Mr. John Hartley. John, welcome to the program. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Alan.
John is an engineer, and he's also a technical journalist who writes for a number of leading engineering publications. And more recently, he's the author of this book called Robots at Work. So he's obviously the person to talk to about the issue we're focusing on today.
And we also have another guest today, a toy that looks like a robot.
That's fantastic. I want one of those for Christmas. I hope all the viewers are listening. That's my Christmas present. John, that's a different kind of robot from the ones that Peggy and I were talking about at the beginning of the program, right?
Well, I'm afraid it's not a robot.
It's not a robot?
It's
not a robot. It looks
like one, but it's not.
Why is it not?
Arm.
Well, because to make it work, Peggy actually has to move those levers.
Uh-huh.
Now, that's a manipulator. Now, with a real robot, she should be able to teach it what to do, press one button, and then it will go on repeating that action until she tells it to do something else. That's what a robot is.
So a robot is something that acts by itself. You don't need to be there flicking switches and moving levers.
Right. Once you've got it going, it just goes.
Well, it takes all the enjoyment out of that toy for me. But anyway, now we know what a robot is. We have some film which shows a variety of industrial robots in use. And John, I wonder, when we are looking at this film, if you'd explain to us what exactly we're seeing.
Okay. Right, well, here we've got some robots doing spot welding on car bodies. This was the first major application for robots, and in fact it's still by far the biggest application.
In the automotive industry?
Well, yes, but it's the biggest in any industry, although it's in the automotive industry. As you can see, the robot can go to each little spot quickly and comfortably.
There are also names and faces that have been put on these machines, I see.
Yes. People have often named machines, but it's only robots they actually call by people's names.
Do you think of robots as women, John?
They seem to. This is a different robot. It's for arc welding. And again, look at this, the light, the bright light coming from the welding work and the fumes. Definitely not a job that you want to do. You much prefer to let a robot do it.
Right.
Now here again we've got a painting robot. This is actually a simulation at an exhibition. Look how smoothly it works. Again, that's quite difficult for a man to do, and it's not a nice place to work with all the paint. Now this is another one, interesting one. This is simulation of an assembly job, a simple job where it picks something up and puts something down in an assembly. Here's another one, different design, but the same principle. Just picking something up and putting it down. This is the biggest possible potential application for robots. Now this one's interesting. You see it's got 3 arms, look. 2 hanging down and 1 at the back.
One more than human beings.
Right.
It doesn't look like a human being at all, in fact.
No, it doesn't. And this is one of the areas in which robots are developing very rapidly. So they don't look like people with arms. This one does though, because this one's under development. This isn't already in use. And it looks like a hand, doesn't it?
What does it do, John?
Well, it's only under development, so it doesn't actually have any uses yet. But we do need robots that are as precise as this. Look, you can just roll that ball off there.
It's very delicate.
Very delicate. Yeah. Now here we've got a couple of arms working together, multi-jointed arms. It's not what they're doing that's important. It's the fact they can work together.
So they're synchronized.
You're right. Yes. Yeah. Oh, this is a robotized trolley. And you see right at the top there's a crossbar with a lot of cameras on it. They're little tiny cameras which give it vision. So it can see where it's going.
It can actually see where it's going.
And how far the things are away from it. Again, this robot has got tremendously wide application in warehouses, in factories, in supermarkets. Anywhere where you move things about, you need robot trolleys. And this is a pretty advanced sort of design with that capability of movement, vision and so on.
Are there many of these in current use?
Not of that type, no. Just simple ones. Now this thing here, well, that looks like a leg, doesn't it?
It's a walking robot.
It's a walking robot. Really, it's only part of a robot, actually.
And it's got 3 legs, again, one more than the human being, so you can see the superiority of robots.
But is this a common type?
Oh, not at all.
We see a lot of them?
No.
What would be the application for a thing like that, John, do you think?
Probably undersea. On the seabed, you know, where it's rough terrain. Now this is important. Now this compliant robot. Now actually it's the thing on the end of the arm that's important here, which is this machinery there. It's a compliant gripper, and it can help insert objects into holes with tight fit. That's a regular problem in assembly. And you see here what it does, it pushes in, then it moves a little bit and then wiggles it into position, but without letting it jam.
Well, what's it doing? Sensing the pressure on the the sides of the object?
Yes, it is. It's sensing the pressure and the position, and then it reacts to that pressure, moves away, and then reacts. Now this one here, also sensing the force, but and then turn it around. Now, the point with this is that if that was a very delicate arm and it just put a lot of pressure on, it would break it. Well, it won't break it. It'll just put the right amount of pressure on. Well, here's another one. This is for inspection, particularly in places we don't want to go. There's a camera on the end of that elephant's trunk, and it just can go into all sorts of weird places.
Like, for example?
A nuclear power station.
So where there's some contamination or high temperatures, low temperatures?
Low temperatures, high temperatures. But, again, this one is actually operated by a man.
So it isn't a robot in actual fact? Or what?
It's more a manipulator, I suppose. This one, again, is a quite different application, looking a long way ahead to maybe a use in hospitals to move people about.
So it's not
nurses need to do it.
Not just in manufacturing that we'll see robots being used.
No, not at all. Service industries too.
This is what a replacement for a guide dog.
Yeah, all under control of some sophisticated machinery there. This is something different entirely again. This is a sushi robot. Small batch manufacture, one might say.
I wonder if the sushi tastes any different when it's been manufactured by a machine.
No, because look, there's the man doing the difficult bit.
So we still need human beings somewhere in the picture. Well, that's a very comforting thought.
We've seen, then, some of the new developments in robots. John, could you tell us where we stand now in terms of how robots are developing?
Yes. The phrase is being coined that we're in the first generation of robots in terms of manufacture, and we're moving into the second generation, that's in the middle there, in terms of development. So the first development, that's to say the first generation, they're fairly simple robots without any sensing, but they can do a lot of useful jobs like spot welding, some assembling, arc welding, and so on. Right, now when we come to the second generation, those robots will have sensors, and they'll be able to see where they're going, for example, so that if they're spot welding, they won't ever miss the point. If they're assembling, if there's no product there, they'll know, and then they'll go and find one that is there and put it in. Things like that. So in other words, we can just program them off the line and then let them work on the line on their own. And then we come to the intelligent robot. Now that's probably not till 1990, I think. But here we're looking at something which can do many more things. It can make some decisions based on data in a computer. It can make some decisions on what it should do, and maybe it'll be used to, say, supervise a factory during the night's operation.
So what's happening is that as the generations of machines develop, the mind of the machine develops. It becomes more sophisticated.
It's the electronics, really, that is the key.
Well, in terms of the future, where do you see robots being used?
Well, there are a lot of potential applications outside industry as we think of it today, but manufacture will always be the bigger user of robots, like up at the top of the tree there. But those are other possible uses, and I think the ones we should look at in particular are in nuclear power plants, where, as we've already seen, we need robots in order to go somewhere where we don't want to go or we can't go because of contamination, and undersea development for mining, for example, off the seabed. Again, it's a sort of job a man can't do, and you need the sophistication of a robot to do it properly.
So these are places where the third generation of robots would be most useful, perhaps?
Yes, probably, yes. The transport, of course, is the other major area.
All the applications we're looking at here are happening now, are they? Or some of these remain in the future?
They all remain in the future, except for manufacture.
Well, when we talk about robots specially used in manufacturing, we often think of Japan. A chart earlier which suggested that Japan has a lot more robots in actual use in automated factories, for example in the automotive industry, than a lot of other countries do. John, why is it that Japan seems to have developed its robots so much more rapidly than other countries?
Well, I think there are three main reasons. The first one is that in Europe and America, managers are very critical of anything new from a cost-effectiveness point of view. It's got to pay for itself in about 18 months or 2 years, otherwise they say it's not economic. Now in Japan, people tend to take the longer view and say, well, we'll put this thing in, it may not be economic, but we'll make it work. And once we've got it working, then we'll put a lot more in and we'll reap the benefits. Now that's one reason. The other reason is that is the lifetime employment, and this has actually got two factors. One is that with lifetime employment, if you put a robot in, you don't actually displace a man, he just does something else. Secondly, with lifetime employment, you've got a fixed labor cost. So therefore, what you've got to do always is to increase the output, increase the number of units you're producing, so you increase your profit. You might also add that in Japan, because of the difficulties of the marketplace, we've got to have a lot of variety. You know, it's not good just having one standard model. You've got to have lots of different models, and therefore you need flexibility.
Models of robots or models of the things that the robots produce?
Other things robots produce, whether it's a car or a TV set, audio equipment, or even agricultural equipment.
So that robots really do have a measure of flexibility as opposed to other kinds of technology.
Yeah, absolutely. This is their great advance. The fact that compared with a conventional automation, a robot can do many different things. For example, one robot could weld, it could paint, it could assemble. I mean, in fact, you don't do that, but it could.
So a robot, one of the big advantage then is flexibility, but what are other advantages of robotization?
Productivity, of course, because the robot does it instead of the man. One robot basically replaces 1.5 people. So if you put in 100 robots, then you don't need 150 people, which reduces the labor cost, increases productivity. And the other reason that's sometimes been forgotten, I think, in Europe, and another reason why Japan was ahead, was quality. Now the point is the robot just keeps doing its job day in, day out, exactly the same. Of course, you can change it to do something different, but whatever it is, it does it faithfully. Now, we humans don't. We get tired. Sometimes we miss things, especially towards the end of the shift or just before lunch. The robot doesn't, so quality is definitely better. And that's almost invariably the case.
Well, we are talking about robots as though they were God's gift to industry. I wonder whether there are any disadvantage to the wide-scale introduction of robots. John, you mentioned earlier that one of the reasons why Japan has been in the forefront of introducing robots into its industry is this lifetime employment system, that it doesn't, when robots are introduced in Japan, they don't necessarily replace people. But this might not be so in other countries that don't have a similar paternal attitude towards employees on the part of the employer. And I know that, well, in our country, Britain, and in some other Western countries, there's a great fear, isn't there, on the part of the workforce that as automation develops, as robots are introduced, people are going to be made unemployed, they're going to lose their jobs and therefore their livelihood. Do you think that sort of fear is justified?
Well, I don't think it is, and I don't think it's quite as strong as people think it is here. You see, what happens is, of course, that union leaders tend to say, oh, we don't want robots, it's a loss of jobs. After all, that's their job. But people who are actually working in the factories don't really quite take that attitude. Now, what about the future? We can see a situation in which maybe in manufacture we need only a third of the people we need today actually on the shop floor. Now that means a lot of jobs. We're nowhere near it yet. We might be 10 years away from it, we might be 20 years away, I'm not sure. However, the other question you should ask, though, is why should we be doing those jobs?
They're the dangerous, the arduous jobs.
You mean these mundane jobs that
I think mundane is the thing. Repetitive, boring work is really where we're putting robots in. After all, every human being has got a brain which is 1,000,000 times brighter than the brain of the most intelligent robot that we can think of today. Anyway, today. We should use that.
Yeah, it seems clear to me that as well as having making industrial changes, as well as changing the way in which we produce things, as robots are introduced on a larger and larger scale, they're also going to wreak some social changes. For example, you say, John, that we needn't do these mundane jobs, these arduous jobs. What is the reason why people should be working in these dangerous or boring areas? But the fact is that in many countries we have developed a work ethic. We think it's right to work. We think it's right to work 5 or 6 days a week. And if we come down to a 3-day week or a 2-day week or a 1-day week, isn't there a danger that we'll begin to feel lazy? Won't robots make us lazy? Won't they begin to make us feel guilty about not fulfilling those traditional functions of human beings to work and earn money and support our families?
Well, clearly we're facing a very difficult period of change. But if you look back at history, we've survived a lot of change. I mean, if you go back an awfully long way, people didn't have any division between work and play. They got up in the morning, they needed food, they cooked it. Then they needed more food, so they went out and hunted it or got it from the fields. And then they started talking, and then they had to work again. But they didn't think one was work and one was play. That was just life. Then we got this work ethic. Now, I agree, here in Japan in particular, where the work ethic is so strong, it's a very fundamental change. Now, it may be that in Europe, where we've got high unemployment, we're better placed, or they are better placed to face this, because they're already saying, what happens to these people? How are we going to live our lives without work? And certainly there are some young people today in Europe who don't think of working now.
But they will have valuable, productive lives.
They hope so. I don't think they know. But what we've really got to do is to re-educate ourselves. It's not just a question of the way we do it at school, is it? It's other
Education
things.
is the whole...
It's the whole world.
Well, it's often mentioned, of course, that the leisure industry will benefit enormously from the introduction of a 4-day week or even a 3-day week. And if robots are moving in that direction, what will we see? Will we see robots actually producing more and more newer products which people will use in their leisure time? Is this going to be one of the major social changes, you think, that robots will introduce?
I think so. I think there's a real danger, actually, that we produce a lot of rubbish. And we've got so many robots just there, we can produce all sorts, which would be a bad thing. I think what we need to do is to develop leisure activities which exercise the mind, and in fact, matter the hand. You know, maybe in 20 years' time, nobody will actually have to have any dexterity of the hands. Nobody will be working on a production line doing difficult assembly. Nobody be writing with pens. They'll just be talking to computers. So
it sounds horrible to me. I don't know how you feel about it, but I mean,
no,
that's...
I'm excited. I think it's a whole new world, and we just have to feel positive about it and say, this is where we're going. Let's say that's the goal. Let's go there.
Do we stand to lose anything as human beings by the introduction of these robots? I mean, you talk about physical dexterity, and if human beings are no longer exercising themselves at work, then they've obviously got to make a conscious effort to exercise themselves in some other way, in some leisure or sports activity.
Most certainly, yes. Things like music and painting and woodwork, those sort of things which combine the mind and the hands, I think, are very important educational methods.
Quick question. In the year 2000, how do you see your own life being changed by what's going to happen in this field between now and then?
Well, I don't think I'll have any paper in my office. I think it'll all be on memories in semiconductors and things. And I suppose when I visit a factory, I won't see any people there either.
I don't know how our viewers feel about this. I feel a little bit disconcerted, Peggy.
I'm looking forward to it myself, though.
Well, we are going to be among the first people replaced, you know. I mean, you don't need us sitting talking to this screen. Wouldn't you? The viewers would clearly much prefer to have a robot here. Anyway, they'd certainly prefer to have you sitting there, but I'm sure that a robot could quite easily replace me. Speaking of which, we won't see you next month. We'll see you in January, by which time it may well be that we have both been replaced. We live in a robot age. We asked the question today whether robots are our friends or our foes. I don't know. Are they going to put me out of a job, or are they going to give me much more leisure time in which I can enjoy myself? We don't know that either.
We don't, but they certainly are in our future.
They are, and they're in our present. John, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for coming to the studio and being with us and being so patient with our ignorance.
Not at all, thank you.
Until we see you again in January, it's goodbye from us and Issues in Focus.
Goodbye.